Welcome to this lecture. My name is Barbara Gochalia, and today we are going to look at the theory of costs and their estimation. Let's look at the chapter overview. Basically what you're going to look at, we're going to look at definition of cost, the short-run relationship between production and cost, the short-run cost function, the long-run relationship between production and cost, the long-run cost function, the learning curve, economies of scope, and other methods to reduce costs. Now, when you talk about costs in a layman's language, for lack of a better word, I would call them maybe expenses, right? So costs are either relevant or irrelevant. And let's look at different types of costs. We have what you call historical cost. Now, a historical cost is incurred at the time of procurement. In other words, the cost that you incur when you are procuring, for example, the raw materials, the inputs that you require in the production process. Then replacement costs, just like the name goes, these are costs that are basically incurred to replace inventory. Now, these costs can either be relevant or irrelevant. Let's look at opportunity cost. Now, opportunity cost by definition is the second best alternative foregone when choice is made. For example, when you have two things to choose from, when you choose one and you leave out number two, then it means that number two is the opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is an indirect cost. For example, administrative costs, security costs. An indirect cost is a non-monetary cost, right? So non-monetary costs are also called opportunity costs or implicit costs. Then there is what we call out-of-pocket costs. Out-of-pocket costs are monetary costs, right? And monetary costs are also referred to as direct costs or fixed costs. Then monetary costs are also referred to as explicit costs, right? So just as whereas the indirect costs are referred to as implicit costs, the direct costs are also referred to as explicit costs. Now let's look at incremental costs. Incremental costs are marginal costs. Incremental varies with a range of options available in the decision-making process. Incremental costs can also be referred to as marginal costs, and we're going to see what marginal cost means later on. Sunk costs. So sunk costs by definition, they are costs that are already incurred and cannot be recovered. For example, if you paid rent for the premises where you're carrying out your business from, and you discover maybe the business is not working, or you discover that it's not beneficial at that particular time, then a sunk rent would be a sunk cost, just because you cannot get back that rent. You've already paid it. So sunk costs are costs that have already been incurred and cannot be recovered. So are sunk costs relevant? Yes, they are relevant. Yes, because they are considered during decision making. Now let's look at the relationship between production and cost. So there is a relationship between production and costs. Why? Because you cannot incur costs when you are not producing. Yeah, you cannot incur any cost if you are not producing anything, if you are not producing any output. So a farm's cost structure is intimately related to its production process, and that's what I mean, that you cannot incur costs when you are not producing. And costs are determined by production technology and input prices. So assuming the farm is a price taker in the input market. So this would basically be a perfectly competitive market structure. Now, this is the relationship between production and costs. And this table shows us the total input. And in this case, the input in the production process is labor. And the output, or the total product, the output is also known as the total product, and then the marginal product. Now we shall look at, I'll be explaining how we calculate these costs, how we estimate these costs in another special lecture. But for now, we can look at the theoretical bit of it, and then we shall have a special lecture where I'll be explaining how we arrive, or how we estimate these costs. Right? So in a relationship between production and cost, we know that in the production process we incur input, and one of the inputs in the production process is labor, the number of laborers, the number of workers, the number of employees. And the total output is also known as the total product. I've already said that. And in the short run, this remember this is happening in the short run. And in the short run, what we should know is that the costs are, in the short run, we have fixed costs and variable costs. But in this particular case, we are assuming that the fixed cost is 0. And therefore, we are only considering the variable cost, which is the total variable cost, which is labor. Right. So when you plot these figures, when you plot this table graphically, this is what we shall arrive at, and we shall discover that the total variable cost is downward sloping. It's having a negative slope, whereas the total product curve is upward sloping, or it's having a positive curve. So we arrive at this just by plotting what is in the table. Right. So just like I've said that in the short run, total cost is given by total fixed cost plus total variable cost, or you can simply say that total cost in the short run, total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost. So even if you don't put total fixed cost or total variable cost, we very well know that if you say fixed cost plus variable cost, it will definitely be total fixed cost plus total variable cost. Now, still looking at the relationship between production and cost, there is what you call marginal cost, and anything marginal is anything extra, is anything additional. So marginal cost by definition is an extra cost incurred to produce an extra unit of output. And mathematically, marginal cost is arrived at by getting the change in total cost divided by the change in output produced, right? So basically here, when we say marginal cost is equal to change in total cost over change in output, but we've already seen that total cost is a summation of total fixed cost plus total variable cost. So here we are just expanding. So when we say change in total cost over change in output, it is the same as change in total cost, which is given by the summation of total fixed cost plus total variable cost all over change in output. So here we are just basically expanding, and here when we say change, which will equal to change in total fixed cost over change in output plus change in total variable cost over change in output. There we are just opening the bracket. And in this particular case, like I said, we are assuming that the total fixed cost is 0. So that's why we end up with only the change in total variable cost over the change in output. Right. So this is the exact table that we've been using. And here we are just basically playing around with the formulae, but at the end of the day, it is the same story. We have to know that marginal cost is the same as change in total cost over change in output. But in this particular case, since our total cost was only considering the total variable cost, then it's therefore means that marginal cost will be change in total variable cost over change in output, whereby we know that the variable cost is basically the total variable cost was basically W times L, whereby W is the payment to labor, which is wage payment to labor. In other words, if you have, for example, 2 laborers and they are paid maybe $500 each, the total variable cost for your labor will be 2 times 500. So that's why we are getting this. We are saying W times the change in L. The change is just the change is just we are just introducing the change because it is already a change in total variable cost. Now there is what we call the law of diminishing returns, right? Now, by definition, the law of diminishing returns is says that as a variable factor, as more units of a variable factor are added to a fixed factor, output will increase up to a certain level, beyond which any additional increase of a variable input to a fixed factor will lead to reduction in output. Now, I can explain the law of diminishing returns in this perspective. For example, if we have in a particular business, for example, if you increase the number of laborers from maybe 1 worker to the second worker, it is going to increase the amount of output produced. Why? Because 2 workers can produce output faster than 1 employee or 1 worker. So the more you increase the number of employees in your business, the more the more time or the more efficient they will be in producing output. The more output they will produce because they are more workers than when you are only one person doing the work. So the more you increase the laborers, the more the output will increase because they will increase on the manpower, right? But this will not increase forever. As the output increases, remember that at the end of the day you have to pay these workers. So the more you increase the number of workers, you reach at a point whereby the payment to these laborers, or the wages or the salaries that you're paying to these laborers will outweigh your revenue. So if you reach a point whereby the payment, the salary that you're paying to your workers is equal to your revenue, and the more you increase the number of laborers in your business, you reach a time beyond which the payment to these workers, the salary payment, will exceed your revenue, and at that point you will be making losses. So that is exactly what happens with the law of diminishing returns, or the law of diminishing marginal product. It is also known as the law of variable proportion. All those ones explanations, all those concepts, they mean the same thing. The law of diminishing returns, the law of diminishing marginal product, and the law of variable proportion. It is the same thing. Now, in the short run, we have what you call the short run cost function. And remember that cost is a function of what? Of output. So for simplicity, in the short run, we have assumptions. The assumptions that we have, that we do assume in the short run. We assume that the firm employs two inputs, and these inputs will be labor and capital. The labor can be in form of the employees or the workers, and the capital could be in form of the machines, or it could be in form of the amount of money that you start with when you are starting a business. So we assume that labor is variable and capital is fixed. So labor being variable is that you can increase or reduce the number of workers. Capital being fixed, it means if you began with maybe $1,000 in your business, the $1,000 will be your capital, and it will not be changing in the short run, right? And then we assume in the short run that the firm produces a single product. And we also assume that technology is fixed. In other words, technology is not changing. We assume the firm operates efficiently, and we assume that the firm operates in competitive input markets. By competitive input markets, we mean that this will be a perfectly competitive market structure where we have very many firms that are producing the same output or the same product. And then we also assume that the law of diminishing returns holds. I've already explained what the law of diminishing returns means. Now, let's look at the different types of costs. There is what you call average total cost, and average total cost is the per unit cost of using all the firm's inputs. We are going to look at these costs and how they are estimated mathematically. And then we have average variable cost. Anything average has to do with the summation of the total observation summation of the total product divided by the number of observation. But in this perspective, we are looking at costs. So anything average, just like we calculate the average, will have to do with the total cost divided by the output, right? Then average fixed cost will be total. By definition, it's the average per unit cost of using the firm's fixed input. But mathematically, it is average fixed cost is total fixed cost over output produced. Now, let's look at the mathematical estimation of these costs. Average variable cost, like I've said, is total variable cost divided by output. When we talk about output, we mean the output produced by the firm, the total output produced by the firm. And average fixed cost is total fixed cost divided by the output, right? But of course, we know that when average total cost is total cost divided by output, whereby we know that total cost is given by total fixed cost plus total variable cost. So average total cost is the same as saying total fixed cost plus total variable cost divided by output, right? So this is the short run cost function, and here we see the short run cost measures and how they are estimated. And like how I said that I will be providing, I will be illustrating a special lecture on how to estimate these costs, or how to calculate these costs. Now, these graphs are arrived at by simply plotting the graphical representation of what is in this table, what we've calculated in this table when we plot it graphically, we shall arrive at these curves, these cost curves. And important for us to note is that cost curves are U-shaped. And why are they U-shaped? We are going to see why they are U-shaped. All right. Now, important observations as we look at these curves, the cost curves. We are going to realize the important observations, right? So here we shall observe that average fixed cost declines steadily over the range of production. And we also realize that all these costs, average variable cost, average cost, and marginal cost, are U-shaped, right? And then, of course, we know marginal cost measures the rate of change in total cost. But important to note about these graphs is that when marginal cost is less than average variable cost will be falling. And when marginal cost is greater than average variable cost will be rising. And when marginal cost is equal to average variable cost curve, average variable cost will be at its minimum. So this is what we mean by this. Now, when you look at this particular curve where we have marginal cost, right? The marginal cost curve, the blue curve that is cutting through upwards, cutting through the average cost and average variable cost curve. Now, when we say that when marginal cost is less than average cost, then average cost will be falling. This blue curve, which is the marginal cost curve, when it is below the section of the marginal cost that is below the average variable cost, at that point when the marginal cost curve, that section that is below the marginal cost curve that is below the average cost curve, at that point when the marginal cost is below the average cost curve, the average cost curve will be falling. It will be the downward sloping section of the average cost curve, right? And at the point where the marginal cost curve intersects or meets the marginal cost curve, at that point it means that it will be a point of minimum average cost. The average cost curve will be at its minimum, right? And this is basically shown by the graph itself, right? So the exact relationship happens with between marginal cost and average variable cost. The same story happens between, when we say the relationship between marginal cost and average cost, the same story happens with the relationship between marginal cost and average variable costs. So we make this observation by simply looking at the curves and how they are behaving. All right. So any decrease in the costs of a farm will be shown by a reduction, will be shown by the cost curve moving, I should say, inwards. So when we see this blue curve of the average cost curve prime, or the new average cost curve, the blue average cost curve, that means that there has been reduction in the average costs of that particular farm, right? And similarly, when we see these inward shifts of the average cost curve inwards, the blue curves, then it means there has been reduction in the average variable cost, there's been reduction in the average cost, and there's been reduction in the marginal cost. And that's why these curves are getting the new curves, right? The new curves that are slope that are downwards, that are shifting downwards. Now, that was the short run. Let's look at the long run relationship between production and cost. Now, important for us to note is that in the long run, in the long run, inputs are variable. Whereas in the short run, we had fixed inputs and variable inputs. In the long run, we only have variable inputs, meaning that if it is the number of workers, we can keep on changing the number. If it is the number of workers, we can change the number of workers. And if, for example, it is the rent in the short run will not change because it is a fixed cost. But in the long run, it could change. Why? Because in the long run, the farm might have expanded. It might have got other branches elsewhere in other regions, maybe in other countries. And definitely, if you were paying, maybe by the time you started, it was just one premise. You were renting one room and you are paying 1 million Ugandan shillings. By the time, in the long run, you would have expanded and you're renting maybe 3 premises in 3 different regions. So definitely the rent will have changed. It will have increased. So that's why we say that in the long run, all inputs are variable, right? And in the long run, they are not fixed costs, just like I've said, right? And the farm's long run production process is described by the concept of returns to scale. We are going to look at what we mean by returns to scale, but important for us to note is that returns to scale are experienced in the long run period of the farm. Okay. Now, I want us to look at this concept of returns to scale. So when in layman's language, when we talk about returns to scale, basically what we mean is that we are talking about the relationship between input and output. And we are asking ourselves that what will happen to output if we increased input? If we increase input, if we change input, if there is a change in input, what will happen to output? If there is an increase in input, what will happen to output? That's exactly what we mean by the concept of returns to scale. Now, we have what you call increasing returns to scale, constant returns to scale, and decreasing returns to scale. Now, with increasing returns to scale, it means that when you increase input by a given proportion, then output will increase by a greater proportion, greater than the proportion by which you increased input, right? For example, if you increase input, could be the raw material that are used in the production process, right, to produce a given level of output, right? So here with increasing returns to scale, if you increase, for example, the amount of raw materials, let me say by 5%, right, then it means that output will increase by a proportion greater than 5%. Output would increase maybe by 10% or by 7%. It could double, it could triple, that kind of scenario. So that's what we mean by increasing returns to scale. And increasing returns to scale is a very good situation it is a very good position for any farm or for any business, right? And with increasing returns to scale, the output will be increasing, but the cost will be decreasing, right? Isn't that a good position for a farm? Yes, it is. Now, there is what we call constant returns to a scale. Now, with constant returns to scale, it means that when you increase input by a given proportion, then output will also increase by the same proportion. For example, if you increase the amount of raw materials by 5%, even the output produced will increase by 5%. That's what we mean by constant returns to scale. Now, there is also what we call decreasing returns to scale. Decreasing returns to scale is the opposite of increasing returns to scale. And decreasing returns to scale is not a good position for a farm. Why? Because if you increase the amount of input by a given proportion, say 5%, output will reduce by a proportion that is less than 5%. So with decreasing returns to scale, costs will just be increasing at an increasing rate. So this is not a very good scenario or a good position for a farm. So also important to know is that increasing returns to scale, because it's a very good position for a farm, it is also increasing returns to scale is also known as economies of scale, and we are going to look at the details of what we mean by economies of scale. And then also decreasing returns to scale is also referred to as diseconomies of scale, right? So the long run relationship between production and cost. So the total product, the long run total product, we've already seen that the total product curve is upward sloping. And here also the total cost curve here, we are seeing that it is also upward sloping. But basically in the long run, we notice, just like I've said, that in the long run, we experience what we call economies of scale. And by IRTS, IRTS means increasing returns to scale in this particular graph. CRTS means constant returns to scale. And DRTS means decreasing returns to scale. And I've explained what each of these mean. Okay. And also important to know that long run marginal cost is the same as long run total cost divided by change in output. Long run average cost is the same as total long run cost, long run average cost divided by the output, right? So it is the same calculation, only that here we are just adding long run marginal cost, long run average cost, but the estimation is, the concept of estimation is the same. And still in the long run, these long run cost curves are also U-shaped. And why are they U-shaped? We are answering the other question that I was asking. Why are cost curves U-shaped? They are U-shaped because of the concept of returns to scale, and we've seen what is instilled, or what is involved in what returns to scale comprises. And we've said that returns to scale, we look at increasing returns to scale, constant returns to scale, and decreasing returns to scale, right? So this is a cost curve, a long run cost curve, long run average cost curve, that basically explains the concept of returns to scale, whereby the downward sloping section of this long run cost curve is shows what we call increasing returns to scale, which is also the same as economies of scale. And then the flat section of this curve explains the constant returns to scale, and then the upward sloping section of the long run average cost curve explains the diseconomies of scale, or decreasing returns to scale. Right. Now, what are the reasons for the long run cost function, or what are the reasons for economies of scale? Now, economies of scale also can also be, much as we say that economies of scale is the same as increasing returns to scale, economies of scale are advantages of large scale production. And this large scale, the advantages of this large scale production, what are the reasons for economies of scale, or what are the reasons for these advantages of large scale production? Now, one of the reasons is the existence of increasing returns to scale, and I've already explained that with increasing returns to scale, the costs are reducing and the output is increasing. So definitely that one, the existence of increasing returns to scale will lead to economies of scale. Then specialization in the use of labor and capital. With specialization, it means we are, for example, specialization of labor. We are basically using people that are experts in a particular role in a farm. People that have the skills in doing a particular kind of job or type of work in a given business. And definitely this will increase output because they know what to do the best way, how to increase output. And then the indivisible nature of many types of capital equipment. Now, the indivisible nature means that this equipment will be able to, these capital equipments, they have more than one use, right? They have multiple uses, multiplicity of the uses of the capital equipment. For example, if you have a machine that has that can print, that can copy, that can scan, it means that it is doing three different jobs or three different functions. Instead of saying, let me have a printer, let me buy a printer alone separately, let me buy a photocopying machine separately, let me buy a scanner, you can have one machine that is doing all the work, right? And you save the costs, yeah? And just like we've said that in this particular period scenario, in this particular event, the cost will be reducing, but the output will be increasing. So the indivisible nature of many types of capital equipment. And then productive capacity of capital equipment rises faster than purchase price. So with the productive capacity of capital equipment, it would depend on, for example, if it was a photocopying machine, it would depend on how much you could find that it's printing very many, it is doing very many print jobs in the shortest time period, in the shortest time possible, compared to an old maybe printer that takes long, that eats up the paper, that is always faulty, that kind of thing. So if the equipment is very productive, then this will increase output and it will reduce the costs maybe that would have been incurred on repairing this particular equipment. Right. Still on the reasons of for existence of economies of scale, is economies in maintaining inventory of replacement parts and maintenance personnel. So if, for example, you have machines that are always getting faulty, you're always repairing these machines, then it means that it's going to increase your costs, right? An increasing cost will reduce your output. That will not be a very good scenario. But if you have machines that are good and you're taking good care of them, you're minimizing the replacement cost, the cost of the cost of repairing these machines, then it means you're definitely reducing the cost, the amount of cost, and therefore you are increasing output. Then discounts from bulk purchases. So with economies of scale, just like we've said that economies of scale are advantages of large scale production. If a business or if a farm is producing on large scale, then it means that if they are purchasing maybe their input from their suppliers, and they are purchasing in bulk, their suppliers would give them discounts, right? because they are big customers and they're buying in bulk, they'll give them discounts, and these discounts will reduce on the costs of the farm, right? The cost of production for the farm, and this will definitely increase output. So this will bring about the economies of scale. Then lower cost of raising capital funds. So the lower cost of raising capital funds in this perspective could be that maybe if a farm acquired a loan, then it is having low interest rates to pay on this particular loan, or it is servicing a low interest rate. Whereas if the farm is servicing a loan at high interest rates, this will increase its costs and reduce its output. Then spreading promotional and research and development costs. So keeping other factors constant, if you advertise and you carry out research and development for your farm, then it is assumed that it will increase on your sales. You'll sell more and you reduce the costs. Then management efficiencies. Of course, for every farm, management has a very big an upper hand in determining the operation of the farm. If we have inefficient management where the bosses, the managers are recklessly using the money, they are not bothered about reduction of costs for the farm, then the farm is going to face problems. We are going to face problems of increased costs, yeah, and at the end of the day, the farm will not be able to make profits. Now, what are the reasons for diseconomies of scale? Now, diseconomies of scale, just like I said, it is the same as decreasing returns to scale. I've already explained what we mean by decreasing returns to scale. Here, it means that the cost will be increasing as the output reduces. So, this will lead to diseconomies of scale. Then disproportionate rise in transport costs. If at all you're selling a particular product, but you have to incur transportation costs, yeah, in delivering this product to the customer or to the consumer, then these transportation costs are going to reduce on your profits, right? They're going to reduce on your profits, and this will lead to diseconomies of scale. Then input market imperfection. Input market imperfections could be maybe the supply inefficiencies or the uncertainties in supply of maybe raw materials. So that one, if there is, for example, a shortage of supply of raw materials, then it means that it's going to increase on the cost of production. It's going to increase on the costs that the farm will be incurring for the raw materials, and this will definitely be transferred into the prices, increasing the prices. And of course, depending on the law of demand, when you increase the prices, then the quantity demanded will reduce, and therefore you will not be making it will be reducing on your profits as a farm. Then management coordination and control problems, right? So still with management, if management fails, I explained the other one, on the other side of economies of scale, like in a negative way. But if management, for economies of scale, if management is okay and it's well coordinated, it cares much about reducing costs, right? Then we shall have economies of scale. Whereas here, if management is not bothered about reducing costs, it is recklessly leading the business, then it means at the end of the day the business is going to have problems, yeah, and especially problems in efficiency, problems in increasing output, then disproportionate rise in staff and indirect labor. So just like I explained, I gave an example of I gave this example when I was explaining the law of diminishing returns. If the management is just employing workers, just increasing the number of workers without minding as to how the increase in the number of workers will affect the cost structure of the business in terms of increased salary payment to these workers, then it means at the end of the day the business is going to have problems. Why? Because the more you increase the number of workers, the more you have to pay them salary. This will increase on the cost payments, on the salary payments, increasing the costs, and at the end of the day these costs may outweigh your revenue. And at the end of the day, if you don't reduce on the number of workers that you are recruiting or employing, then it is going to dig into your pocket as a firm, and it will reduce your output and definitely your profits. Now, this is how the long run cost function, or the long run cost curve looks like. And important for us to note is that the long run cost function is a summation of various short run average cost curves, or it is a summation of several SAC curves, right? So and just like I said that economies of scale happen in the long run, right? That's why here we are having this curve being explained by economies of scale, diseconomies of scale. And in the long run cost curve, the long run cost curve will be an envelope curve that will envelope these short run cost curves in the long run, right? Now, there is what we call the lowest possible per unit cost when all inputs are variable. And this the lowest output level for which long run is minimized is what we call minimum efficient scale. So minimum efficient scale means the lowest output level that can be produced when the long run the long run average cost is minimized. Now, the learning curve. What do we mean by the learning curve? The learning curve shows us that by what percentage will addition labor decrease? By what percentage will additional input reduce when output is increased? When output is, for example, doubled. If you double output, by what percentage will labor reduce? Right? So that's the learning curve shows us that relationship, that if for example we increase output, if for example we doubled output, by what percentage will the additional input, in this case it could be labor, by what percentage would the additional input reduce? So that's all about the learning curve, right? And the learning curve has a downward sloping a downward sloping shape, right? And it shows the learning curve effect. Now, economies of scope. We've been looking at economies of scale, which is the same as increasing returns to scale. Now, what do we mean by economies of scope? Economies of scope, by definition, is a reduction of a firm's unit cost by producing two or more goods or services jointly rather than separately. So if a business can produce two or more goods jointly and not separately, and by doing so it is reducing its costs, then this is what we call economies of scale. I could give an example to help us understand. For example, if it was a dairy farm that sells milk, it could also choose to not only sell raw milk but begin to produce other milk products like yogurt, like ice cream, like ghee, like butter, right? And if it is producing all those other milk products, it can use the same laborers. It can train the same laborers to produce to make these products without employing separate laborers to produce the different type of products, right? So if the same laborers that are selling the milk are the same laborers that are making the yogurt, they are making ice cream, they are making ghee, it's going to reduce on the costs. Why? Because the farm is producing more than two goods but using the same laborers to reduce costs instead of using different laborers or different workers or different employees to produce each type of good. This would reduce on the farm's cost of production, and this is what we mean by economies of scope, right? Now, what are other methods to reduce costs? Yeah, so other methods could be the strategic use of cost. Being strategic is being able to think outside the box in a way to reduce costs. For example, you could say that if I'm just starting a business, why would I employ, and I know how to make, for example, if I want to start a bakery, but I know how to bake these cakes. In the short run, why wouldn't I make these cakes myself if instead of employing another worker to make these cakes for me? So if I make the cakes myself, that would be a strategic way of reducing costs. Then reduction in the cost of materials. The reduction in the cost of materials could be that you choose to buy maybe your raw materials from cheaper sources to reduce costs. Then using IT to reduce costs. We've seen people using IT. We've seen businesses using online platforms to advertise, using platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, to advertise, and this would be less costly compared to advertising in the newspapers, advertising with radio stations and TV stations. So using IT, people are now using apps like the Safe Border, like Uber. So that one is using IT to reduce costs. Then reduction of process costs. Still, if for example you reduce on what is the costs that are incurred in the production process, it could be maybe that you need machines to in the production process, but instead of these machines, maybe you can use human beings to reduce the costs. Then relocation to lower wage countries or regions. You could find that maybe working in another country, you get cheaper labor than compared to working in your own country, and this will reduce on the labor costs, right? So that would also help in the reduction of costs. Then mergers, consolidation, and downsizing. Mergers, this would be for example, two firms coming together and these two farms coming together will reduce the costs. I can give a good example here in Uganda, where we had Wari Telecom merging with Zain, right? And this led to reduction of costs. Why? Because Wari Telecom was a new telecom company that did not have masts. Yeah, it did not have telecom masts. But when it joined with Zain, Zain was already established in the country, and when it became one farm, it became Airtel Uganda. So definitely this one reduced the costs because it was one farm, and therefore it was reducing on the cost of masts because Zain was already established and it had its own masts. So that one reduced on the costs. And then consolidation and downsizing. Downsizing, we see that some workers for Wari Telecom were laid off, and then of course now laying off workers means the firm is reducing its costs on the salary payments, right? And then layoffs and plant closings. So if you see that the firm cannot maybe afford to pay off workers, you can lay off some workers. And then plant closings, you could find that maybe if a business has two different kind of businesses that it is doing, and one business is not profitable, it could decide to give up that business and instead reinvest the money in another business that is profitable. So basically, this is that. In this chapter, we shall look at the cost estimations. I'll be explaining the calculations. Thanks for listening. Till next time, see you.